Welcome to the latest Women's Soccer Weekly podcast. Getting ready for the NWSL regular season to kick off tomorrow. My name is Jason Longshore. Thanks for listening here on the Soccer Down Here Network. When we started doing women's soccer coverage on a regular basis, one person that I knew I wanted to get on the show was Jonathan Tannenwald. Jonathan's a good friend from the soccer Twitter sphere who works for the Philadelphia Inquirer, covers Philadelphia Union, but he also spends a lot of time discussing and really digging into the details on the women's game, whether it's the national team, whether it is lawsuits, which seem to follow a lot lately in the world of American soccer, also the NWSL and the professional game as a whole. So I knew I wanted to talk to Jonathan, and we were kind of waiting for the right opportunity. Being on the eve of the 7th NWSL season, it seemed like the perfect time. And starting off the conversation, I wanted to talk to him a little bit about why he spends so much time. He's a very busy sports writer, not even just soccer, covers lots of sports for the Philadelphia Inquirer. So I kicked things off asking Jonathan, why do you spend so much time covering and talking about women's soccer in the United States?
And I think number one of them is that I have always seen women's soccer as just soccer and women's basketball as just basketball, right, and women's tennis as just tennis. And you can go on all the way down the list of all the different sports. That's something that I've believed in ever since I was, in high school and maybe even earlier. And I was fortunate because I had there was a professional women's team in Washington from the start of the WUSA, and it was a very good one, obviously, too. It had Mia Hamm and Abby Wambach and so on.
Right. And
somebody you know well, Sarah Kate Knopfsinger.
Yes.
That was a fascinating interaction. I had the first time I met her when she was either just starting to get to work for Atlanta or a little bit before that. I think she might have been working for the ECNL at the time.
That's right, she did.
It was at the year that the coaches convention was in Indianapolis, and I shot her a note and I said, "Hey, I'd like to meet you. Say hello and say thanks for what you did as a player because I watched you back in the day as a player." And it was kind of awkward because she's like, "Who is this guy reaching out to me?" And we ended up meeting each other and saying hello, and it was all perfectly fine, which I appreciated. But no, I remember watching her play quite a bit. I probably have her autograph on a scarf or one of those things where you go around and everybody signs it. She's probably got something that she signed that I've got in a box somewhere in a storage in my apartment. I've always thought of it as just soccer, like any other soccer, and on top of that, and this, and a lot of the people who I'm sure are listening to your show know that they have just incredible stories to tell as players, as people. They are immensely charismatic and always happy to talk, which certainly helps those of us in the media because that, at the end of the day, oftentimes is what we're looking for, especially if you're on the radio. And, they win things too. Doesn't that help?
A little bit. A little bit, definitely. It's weird because, when we look at this and just the way that the women's game is covered here, I'm with you. I think that to me, it's always been the same. It's always just been soccer. It's just, I would enjoy, when I was in college, I enjoyed watching, Mia Hamm score a ridiculous goal against England in San Jose, like late night on ESPN, just as much as I enjoyed watching, Brian McBride score for the men. It was just a good team to watch, and it was good soccer to watch. I think at times the way the game's covered here in the U.S., it's covered differently. Do you feel like that, or do you feel like maybe it should be or shouldn't be?
That is a tough question to answer because there are so many layers in all of this. In is it a sport? Is it a business? Is it a cause? Is it this, that, and the other thing? And there are people who will tell you each of them. I have said for a very long time that I believe we ought to treat women's soccer as a sport and as a business. Now, does that mean that I disagree with some of the other parts of it? No, it doesn't. That doesn't surprise anybody. I'm sure who follows me on Twitter, they've figured that out by now. But at the same time, treating it as a sport and a business means holding it to a high standard. And especially in the case of the NWSL, and I'm certain we're going to get into this in the next few minutes, when they, as good as the soccer is, as good as the player development is, when they're not, securing major sponsors, and corporate money, given the interest that we know is out there in women's soccer, it sure does raise some red flags.
It does. It's a concern. And, I've seen this argument, and we got into it on Soccer Down Here this week. Stephanie's article over at All for 11 on the SB Nation network about, that battle of, is it a charity? Is it not a charity? How should you talk about it? How should you treat it? And I think it is all wrapped into one. And as somebody who worked, on the charitable side, I think there's a negative perception there that charities, whether they're soccer based or not, are playing on your heartstrings just to get a donation, and there's not that relationship building that to me is at the heart of all of this. Whether you're talking about Major League Soccer, whether you're talking about the NWSL, men's national team, women's national team, whatever lower division is out there, men's or women's, or a charity. You have to build relationships, and it's something that I don't know if the NWSL has completely succeeded in doing outside of the success stories like a North Carolina, like a Portland, like a Utah in a pretty quick way. That relationship building seems to be lacking at times.
But why is it working in Utah?
It's a good question.
Because from the outset, Deloy Hansen has treated it as a professional sports team. Nothing more and nothing less. And obviously Merritt Paulson has done the same. That's been written about. Some of the folks who've read Caitlin Murray's new book on the U.S. women's soccer team and its history will see the details of that. Steve Malik and Kurt Johnson have treated the Courage as a professional soccer team. It's really, sometimes it's that simple. And yes, it's a lot of money, but it's if you're going to do it. I've had this conversation with a lot of people in Philadelphia about, why the union won't buy an NWSL franchise. I've said it's very simple. They got to put their own house in order before they run a second one. And you want to make sure that if they're running a women's team, everything is to the same high standard that you give to a men's team. I know Darren Eales knows that down in Atlanta, and I know that you and I, I'm sure, have both heard that there is interest down there.
Sure.
And the same is with Cincinnati, the same is with LAFC. They are not going to get in until they can do it right, and they should not be allowed in until they do it right.
100% agree. And I think then that kind of leads us to, something you alluded to before about the NWSL. And I think the flip side is also, those owners who have money and have invested in the game on the men's side so far. And I think to varying degrees, all of them are seeing returns on that investment. Is the NWSL ready for being able to provide that same return on the investment of an Arthur Blank or, of the Cincinnati ownership, or even Louisville City, who's talked about it? Mia Hamm's talked about it. I think the interest is there. Is the league ready for that? And the preparation for 2019 has worried me in different ways, and you've tweeted it out this week about different front office staffers who have left the organization. It's really strange timing looking at it from the outside.
It's very jarring. There is a simple reason for it, which is that these jobs are moving to Chicago as a result of the ending of A&E Network's equity stake in the NWSL and the dissolution, for lack of a better word, of the, I don't want to call it, they call it a media entity, but you and I both work on the journalistic side of the ledger, would call it a content entity. Sure. That was based in New York out of A&E Network A&E Network's headquarters. That's being dissolved, and those jobs are moving to Chicago. And some of those people who have now left are very good friends of mine, and so it's a little difficult for me to talk about them publicly, except to say that I don't think it's any secret to anybody that if those jobs were to stay in New York, perhaps they'd keep those jobs. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's any secret to anybody. There's plenty of people in Chicago, who we've never heard of. The job solicitations are going to go out, for hires in Chicago. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who can do them. The question is whether you're doing right by the people you have in your stable, some of whom have been involved in women's soccer for a long time and done really good work within it. Are you doing right by them by handling things the way you are? And I think some folks would say the answer to that question is no. I think the league will end up in a fine position, but they certainly are not at the moment. And for all of these things to be happening in the same span of time and just before the season kicks off is not good. Certainly not a good look.
No, it's not. We talked about it on the Daily Show this week. I believe it was Tuesday when you'd visit NWSL.com. There was no mention of Yahoo Sports. You'd look at the schedule. There was no Yahoo logo. Now, it's there now, and you have more content there now. But those things were very jarring looking at it from the outside. And, we talk to listeners who want to know more about the league, and they hear about the Courage and what North Carolina's doing just up the road from us. And, wow, it's a team I want to learn more about. I want to watch more about. And it's a little difficult at times. And I think that's something that the league has to figure out the way to navigate that this season.
And I think part of the problem ultimately is this. Because of U.S. Soccer's involvement in the league, there is an incumbency on that body to do a little more than it's been doing. And I haven't said that overly directly yet until now. But the simple truth is, if you're going to headquarter this league out of U.S. Soccer's offices, which is where they are, for all intents and purposes. I mean, maybe they're not absolutely in Soccer House at this point. They used to be. I think a few of them might still be. But, if you're going to headquarter them in Chicago, in part because U.S. Soccer is headquartered there, then U.S. Soccer has to step up and do a little more. And when the U.S. women's team did that the Luna Bar money that came in recently, it's not really a sponsorship deal yet. It's going to be, but it's not yet.
Right.
When that money came in, I went on Twitter and I said it would be great if Luna would do something like this for the NWSL, not just to benefit the 23 players, who I made abundantly clear are eminently deserving of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to do something for everybody else, too. And I got some emails and texts real fast saying, why did you say that? You don't know that they're going to be doing something more, so on and so on and so forth. And that was so and so. And I said, well, nobody told me that until now. So, yes, they are going to be doing more.
Excellent.
And yet at the same time, and we found this out in Caitlin Murray's book, one of the original sins here was going all the way back to the WUSA and their not being under the Soccer United marketing umbrella when it was launched. Mm-hmm. Which, as we saw in that book, is something that the women actually complained to the U.S. Olympic Committee about in terms of equal treatment because of money that U.S. Soccer had helped put into MLS and so on and so forth. Well, that sin has never really been repented is too strong a word. But the truth is we know that women's game still is not under the Soccer United marketing umbrella. And so I have had people say to me that, yes, more corporate sponsorship needs to come into the NWSL. And in part because that would potentially help lessen some of the burden on U.S. soccer of funding the league, which is a noble idea, except that if anybody from U.S. soccer ever says that, we all have a right to turn around back on them and say, you guys have the ability to help make this happen, and you're not doing it.
That's what makes it so complicated.
It's one person in particular, not just one person, but it falls on one person more than anybody else, and it's not Carlos Cordero, believe it or not, and it's not Dan Flynn. It's somebody who I have written about a few times in recent months and before that, and that is Jay Berhalter, who's the Chief Commercial Officer of the U.S. Soccer Federation. He could play a bigger role in this if he wants to. I have seen him in NWSL board meetings. I know he's involved. I know he's paying attention. And as I'm sure you have seen over time, Jason, there is not any major thing that happens in this country, especially in regards to international soccer events, that Jay does not have a hand in some form or fashion.
Correct.
If they're really – this is not to excuse the NWSL as its own in the ways that it is its own independent entity, because they as their own entity have not done enough to attract sponsorship. They have not, I dare say, hired enough and of the right people to do it. And we saw that their vice president of sales, which I believe was another of the New York jobs, just left. So they've got to replace that person. Mm-hmm. That doesn't excuse the league from having not done its part. But if U.S. soccer would like to do more in this regard, I think they have the ability. And given, as I have said many times now in recent months, and people keep complaining when I say it, but unfortunately I'm going to keep saying it, because U.S. soccer is a nonprofit entity and a governing body and not a private business, they can have a different motivation in all of this than simply a private business that's listed on the stock market, for example. And I've had people say to me, well, U.S. soccer should be a private business. Well, they're not.
Yeah, they're not going to be. That's not going away anytime soon.
Well, a sport, I think you and I would probably say that a sport governing body ought not to be a private business. That's not the point of it.
Right.
Certainly not the point of the Ted Stevens Act, all things considered. And we'll have that disagreement with people, I'm supposed. That's a philosophical thing, not a, some of that you can never resolve with and somebody's going to disagree with you. But I think there is more that can be done, and there are people in positions to do more than the more hasn't been done by those people. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting looking at it from the outside and trying to, wrap your head around just how complicated all of the behind the scenes can be. This league, and I think it's something that does get lost in the shuffle, and I had to kind of remind myself of this morning as well. This is year 7. The two previous leagues didn't get past year 3. You combine them, you're still not to this point now. This league has survived. Where do you feel like it is in terms of, okay, is there still a threat of it going away? Is there, now you've solidified and you're looking to grow? Is it poised and is it ready to grow?
It's not going anywhere. I think that's for sure. And I think the big reason why the subsidizing of the marquee, the U.S. and Canadian players' salaries is the big reason. That's the money. That's the biggest cost. That's the biggest help. I think, though, we're going to want to see at some point coming as more owners with more money get involved. Certainly when LAFC comes in, I would imagine that Cincinnati might have the same interest, and when Atlanta, if they come in, isn't it about time for this league to have a designated player rule? Exactly. For the international players who can really put a spark into this thing. Go get, Barta already is obviously here. You got some Japanese players. Sam Kerr is obviously already here. Sam Kerr, players like them surely deserve more than the league maximum of $46,000 or whatever it is at this point. And they're probably making more than that in some form or fashion.
Right. But, it's the early days of MLS where you have the under-the-table things happening where they're credited at 46, but there's more money.
Endorsement deals and things like that. Right. How about Viviane Miedema of the Netherlands? I've wanted Wendy Renard to play in this League of France, who's one of the great personalities in the international game. The list can go on and on. Can maybe, if the money gets there someday, can one rationally, if there's a designated player rule on the amount of money and you're Atlanta United and you want to make a big splash the way they did with Miguel Almiron, do you try to get Eddie Hegerberg to come over here? You know? Not saying I know anything because I don't. I'm just throwing it out there for the heck of it.
No,
but,
that's the position where it is. It's interesting because it's different than where MLS was when they created the designated player rule. They were trying to catch up. The NWSL shouldn't be trying to catch up, although what's happening in Spain with record attendances, what's happening in England with the Super League and drawing a lot of attention there. I mean, even yesterday, Costa Rica set a new record for attendance for a match with Saprissa. The professional club game's growing all over the world, and if NWSL doesn't get into competition for the top stars around the world, it could fall behind a bit.
I think it's possible. We'll see. But I think the one thing that won't change, I think, over here for a long time to come is that the league will remain the most competitive in the women's game. Okay. Because I don't think you're going to get a 20-team deep, a 20-team deep, really good women's league in Europe. Just not.
Right.
You barely have it with the men's leagues at this point. All things considered.
It's very true.
So, the depth of the depth and some of the competitive balance, it helps. And it will ensure that there's a depth of talent and competitiveness in this league that is going to help keep it alive. Because even if MLS is at the point where we're ready to take some of the shackles off, in a women's league, it'll be a long time before we get there.
Well, let's get into that competitiveness as we start to look ahead to the on-the-field side of it. And North Carolina Courage kind of shattered some of that last season and did it in a different way. I think what's jumped out to me about the Courage is you see the big names in the league not really in North Carolina. Great players in North Carolina, don't get me wrong, but Alex Morgan isn't there, Marta isn't there. The headliners haven't been there, but Paul Riley's put together the most complete team in the league, and they only lost once last season. Is North Carolina's dominance last year, and looks like they're poised to repeat at least elements of that this year, is that a good thing for the league to have a super team?
A, yes. B, the lack of stardom in North Carolina is of Paul Riley's making. Mm-hmm. Nothing more and nothing less. That's the kind of team he likes to have. He wants a bunch of players he can coach up and play the underdog card with, as he did for years and years and years, going all the way back to when he was here in Philadelphia with the Independents. And I finally got, when they won the championship this past last year, I was there in Portland. I said, Paul, you're going to drop the underdog card now? And he said, yeah, I think I finally have to. And we all had a good laugh about it.
Yeah.
The super team is the Thorns. Money, fan base, star power, all that. The Courage are really good, and it'll be interesting to see if this will be heaven knows how many years from now. Not going to happen anytime soon. Whenever Riley goes, then what?
Right.
That's when things get really interesting with them.
Are they going to be able to repeat what they did last season with a lot of players away for the World Cup and the way the league's managing the World Cup? How do you feel about the scheduling this season with teams missing, in some cases, 6, 7, 8 starters for a long period of the season?
Well, if anybody can do it, they can. I think that, they do have a lot of players, who are not going to be at the World Cup. Lynn Williams is going to score a ton of goals this year because she's not going.
That's true.
Denise O'Sullivan isn't going. Heather O'Reilly is going to do TV work, which is, an amount of time, obviously, but pulling up their roster real quick. If the really interesting thing to me, the one that'll make a difference is if Jess McDonald makes the U.S. team.
I totally agree.
If she does, then maybe it's at the point where they've lost a little too much. But if she doesn't, Merritt Mathias is really good. She'll play plenty. Jalen Hinkle, for all the controversy, is a very good player. I don't think even the people who don't like her can't deny that she's a really good player.
Absolutely.
And the title game last year, saw to that. If McCall Zerboni doesn't go, although I think she will, but if she doesn't, that's another big boost. So they won't lack for players. I think, the chatter is around Houston because they aren't going to lose much of anybody.
Right.
And oddly enough, Sky Blue FC, because they aren't going to lose all that many players either. Can they finally, get it together? And if so, things get very interesting.
Well, let's move to the other side of the table then, in Sky Blue. What do you think about the things that it's taken a while for them to address the issues that came up very publicly last season? I think they've started that process. Where do you think they are going into 2019?
A good team on the field with talent, but they still have a heck of a lot of questions to answer. And I don't think they've answered them all yet. And why it took until this week specifically for Tony Novo to depart, I don't know. I'd like to find out and try to find out in the coming days, but I don't know yet. There's so many things that team needs to do on and off the field. Obviously, they almost all come down to money. But they cannot stay at Rutgers forever. And if they aren't going to stay at Rutgers forever, then where are they going to go? If they go to Red Bull Arena, either it's going to cost them a lot of money, or Tom Hofstetter, who's involved in the ownership group, believes still, and Steve Tamaris and Phil Murphy might have to finally sell up because the Red Bulls might say, hey, we want to buy this thing finally, as they talked about doing some years ago. And then, if not the Red Bulls, well, you're going to cross the Hudson. City Football Group puts a lot of money in women's soccer worldwide. Mm-hmm. They're sitting right there. You don't even have to change the team name, and you don't even have to change the colors, as we've all joked many times.
Very true.
They're sitting right there. And that's something where, if they are interested, and I am the president of the NWSL, maybe with the help from a couple of the bigger owners, that's where the time is right to take the goodwill that you have accrued from your owners and come down over the top and say, let's go. And if I'm City Football Group, by the way, you've seen me say this a few times before. I'm sure some of your listeners have too. I put them at Columbia University, probably in the football stadium, even though it has gridiron lines on it, because the soccer stadium, I don't think, has the capacity for an NWSL game. I put them in the football stadium for a few years. And then I turn around to the city council in New York and say, hey, we're not just doing this for a bunch of rich white guys and foreign oil sheiks. There's a lot more to this, because there is a lot more to it, and frankly, there always has been. Absolutely. The charitable work that NYCFC does in the borough is real, and it's big.
It's massive. I mean, I can tell you from being in that world, watching what they did when New York City Football Club was announced. It influenced a lot of what Soccer in the Streets is doing. Soccer in the Streets was able to create the partnership with MARTA and public transit and do station soccer, but putting mini pitches all over the area was something that was massive that City Football Group has done in the New York area.
That's right. And so now you expand that by saying we have a professional women's team and the ability to put home these charitable efforts with the young girls and women of the incredibly diverse New York City. Does that help get a stadium over the line? If it does, are you using the women's team? Yeah, you are. But I would argue that you're doing it for a good reason.
And is that necessarily a bad thing? We look at the difference in way things are branded here, and this was something that came up with Jess Sharman, who is a program director with Soccer in the Streets, and she came up through Redding's academy before coming over here to play in college at Clayton State. A difference we see in the way the women's game's presented worldwide is it's Chelsea women, it's Chelsea ladies, it's Arsenal ladies, it's part of the club as a whole, as opposed to being separate. It's Portland Timbers, Portland Thorns, there's synergy. It's not Portland Timbers women. In this case, I think
it can't be Portland Timbers women.
Why not?
You know why?
No, I don't.
That's the difference between one league being Nike and one being Adidas, as far as I know.
Good point. And that does factor into it. And that would be something that would have to be resolved for that to happen. True. In this case, though, okay, you bring them into the club. It stays as Sky Blue, or they find some other branding to rebrand it, what have you. It builds the overall club. And I think you have NYCFC fans who have never followed the NWSL who would be interested because it's part of the club. And I think you're going to get vice versa. I think you're going to have women's soccer fans who are going to say, well, okay, I'm the women's team first, but hey, there's a Friday night. I'm going to go see NYCFC as well. It builds up the affinity for the club as a whole.
Oh, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. And we'll see where it goes. And, I suppose from that, we'll see what Atlanta does in that same capacity.
100%.
And if they do, would they play at Kennesaw where the Beat used to play, or elsewhere? Or, you'd think they'd play a couple of doubleheaders maybe when the timing's right. But obviously you're not going to play every game in there. It's an open question.
It is, and we see what Portland and Utah have done, and North Carolina as well. It's USL Championship, but it's the same mentality. You hit it dead on as we started about how they just treated it as a professional sports team, and it's been presented as such, and the fans have responded. What do you think needs to happen for Houston and Orlando to have that same response? Because the situation's the same, or similar at least, but the reaction from the potential fan base and from the community is not the same.
Marketing money helps more than anything, I would say. I don't have an easy answer for that because I have watched professional soccer grow in Atlanta, and, do the Pride have a little bit of marketing to do? Yes, but some of that, frankly, is on the fans, especially in Orlando. I don't think that the fans in Orlando have all that much of an excuse, because it's no secret that Alex Morgan and Marta play there. Never has been.
Right.
So, that's part of it.
Orlando's been a real head scratcher in that because, we talked about North Carolina not going with the headliners, and it fits Paul Riley's MO, but Orlando has. And you've got Marta, who, if you're a soccer fan in the United States, you know who she is. Even if you don't know the women's game well, you know who she is. You definitely know who Alex Morgan is. Most people know who Sydney Leroux is. And it hasn't really translated on or off the field. The off-the-field thing, I think, is a little bit bigger issue. But what do you think about the Pride on the field? I've just had bigger expectations for them, and we haven't really seen much.
I don't have an answer, really, because I'm not down there. But it's certainly a question that a lot of people are asking.
Is it the classic, maybe, that we see this with teams in MLS, we see this with teams in any league around the world, where, Paul Riley's decided to build a team that's very balanced, and Orlando is top-heavy, and they just don't have the balance and the depth to go where they want to go. We'll see if Mark Skinner changes that. He's getting a chance to, start somewhat fresh, and you are going to be missing some pieces to the World Cup, but Orlando has an opportunity for a new start. Is there anybody in the NWSL this year, North Carolina, Portland are your top two. Who do you think could be that surprise that makes it into the championship match?
I did predictions.
Uh-oh.
In the NWSL sends a prediction survey around to the media, and they make something of it. Which 4 teams will make the playoffs? I said Chicago, North Carolina, Portland, and Utah.
Okay.
Chicago's really good. I think Danielle Colaprico ought to be going to the World Cup, but she's probably not, so that makes them better over the course of the rest of the season. Houston's the team that a lot of people think is going to make a jump up. I think that Utah is really a team to watch. I think Laura Harvey, look, she has not always coached up to her reputation among her fans, that's for sure. But they've got talent. They've got some cohesion. We'll see what Kristen Press does in whatever time that she is there. And I think that one of the most underrated signings of the offseason was Vera Bouquet.
Thank you.
She's a great player. I got to know her a little bit when she was in Philadelphia some years ago. And I think that she can make a big impact this year.
Love watching her play. And Utah just missed out on the playoffs last year. Chicago got the last seat at the table. One club we haven't mentioned, and they've got a little bit of off-the-field news as well, is Reign FC. So they're moving out of Seattle. They're going to Tacoma. They dropped the Seattle branding.
Reign FC based in suburban Seattle. Is that right every time I mention them?
Yes. I've had to explain this multiple times, that it's the same club. It's just not Seattle Reign anymore. They're going to be over in Tacoma. Partnership with the Sounders are somewhat involved here. You have the same front-of-the-shirt sponsor. You have Reign moving over to play at the same place as the Sounders USL Championship affiliate, Tacoma Defiance. What do you think of that move, and what do you think of them on the field?
I think it's a very good move. I just think they might be the odd team out this year. But I think they're going to be very good. So let's see. They will have, during the World Cup, Morgan Andrews, Lauren Barnes, Jess Fishlock, Shea Groom, who else? As I often do, I go scrambling, all the way through everything while I'm talking.
Nielsen as well, Nielsen, with Denmark, who missed out. If
Allie Long doesn't go to the World Cup, she's around.
That's a big
Megan Oyster's around. Taylor Smith, they signed as a right back. She's very good. But they're going to lose a lot. And I mean a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If they all go to the World... Jasmine Spencer's another one that they will have, who's a very good player in the league. So who are they going to lose? Lydia Williams, Jodie Taylor, possibly Rumi Utsugi if she goes with Japan, Megan Rapinoe, obviously, at least Kellen Knight with Australia, possibly Allie Long, as we mentioned, and Steph Catley. That's a lot.
That's a lot to overcome.
I think Carolina has the depth. Portland has, the talent and all the advantages that we've all talked about for a long time. I think Seattle might be the odd team out.
It seems like they're the one that could be hurt the most by the schedule and the World Cup overlap. One we haven't mentioned, 8th place last year, only 2 wins, Washington Spirit. Another new manager in the league, Richie Burke. What do you think about the Spirit heading into 2019?
I don't know what to make of them because I don't know what Richie Burke is going to be able to do as a coach of a professional women's soccer team.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody knows at this point. Now, they've got players. And that's, again, in terms of on the fence of who goes to the World Cup, some Australians that they're going to lose. They're going to lose Lavelle, obviously. They're going to lose Pugh. They are not, at this point, going to lose Andy Sullivan unless somehow she's the 23rd player that goes, but I don't think she's going to be. They've got some players, and I think Tegan McGrady has the potential to step up as during the World Cup, especially as a rookie. We will see. I don't think they're going to be great. I mean, the big ones are Sullivan, Lavelle, and Pugh, and those are big players. Ashley Hatch is somebody who has had a lot of hype and potential over the years, but has not lived up to it yet. I think it's safe to say. The biggest question is, how are they going to play for Richie Burke? We have no idea. We just don't know.
So we've run through all the teams. We've talked a lot about the on and the off the field stuff. So I want to finish up with this, Jonathan. What are you most excited about with the upcoming NWSL season? And if you could change anything going into 2019 for the NWSL, what would you change?
Oh, that's a dangerous question, isn't it? What am I most excited about? We have this league. It's a World Cup year. There is every reason for all of us to be able to say, here it is, let's go watch it. Let's go and pay attention to it. Especially going into the World Cup when the MLS games maybe matter a little less. If you're, I've got a game, to go to on April 28th. I'm going to miss Sky Blue's home opener because the Union are at home that same day. But on April 28th, which is the last game before the World Cup players leave, they're hosting the Thorns. That's going to be a circus.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of fun to be at because you're going to have Tobin Heath coming home, plus Lindsey Horan, plus, et cetera. Carly Lloyd on the other side, Savannah McCaskill, and Naho Kabasumi, who I think could be a very interesting player for Sky Blue this year after coming over from the Reign. We'll see with that. But everything's right there for the NWSL to get attention right out of the gate, except one thing, and this is what I would change. And I don't mean this as a slight to Yahoo Sports because I actually think that they're going to do a fairly good job, all things considered. They have the distribution platform. They can take the feed and throw it out to everybody. But you do a little bit have to know that it's there. And some people don't. And so the one thing that I would change is I would put the NWSL on ESPN+. I've said that a million times. I realize it. I don't like to come across as a shill for ESPN, blah, blah. I know I get all the criticism about it. But first of all, I've said this. This is a fact that I don't think anybody can dispute. Even the people at Fox, Fubo, YouTube, Flow, obviously, you name it. The price point on ESPN Plus flattens them all. Every single one of them.
Absolutely.
Now, nobody else can do that. Nobody else can do $50 a year because Disney has so much money in the bank. We've seen this with the new Disney Plus they just announced yesterday. That's all the entertainment, the movies and everything, all that. Nobody else can do that. But they're doing it, so try to beat them. Well, you can't. Imagine MLS, the USL, the Open Cup now, and the NWSL all in the same place. There you are on a Saturday night. You're sitting at home. I have an Apple TV. It's nice. I put a little money into buying it, but it's been worth it. Why? You can watch 4 games at once. So you do your little quad box, a couple MLS games, and a couple of NWSL games. Isn't that what we want in terms of exposure, things like that? Put it all in one place so that people can watch it.
Thanks again to Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer. You can follow him on Twitter at The Goalkeeper, THE, Goalkeeper. Lots of great takes about MLS, about American soccer as a whole, both men's and women's, but Jonathan excels in covering the women's game, and we'll definitely be talking to him again as we get a little bit closer to the Women's World Cup. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the latest Women's Soccer Weekly podcast. If you have topics, if you have things you would like for us to cover, things that aren't getting covered enough in the women's game, please give us a heads up. Tweet at us at Soccer Down Here. Send us a message. Let us know what type of content you would like for us to bring to you. Thanks for listening. We greatly appreciate it, and we'll be talking to you next week.